Okay, well this one's supposed to be brief, and I will do my best. Although I do need to point out that one of my graduate students once, with maybe a grain of truth in it, gave me the nickname of Dr. Digression. So try not to live up to that one. So the topic I was assigned for this is, okay, we talked about the theory, what about the practice? And so the title is Achieving and Maintaining Nutritional Ketosis. And I want to point out that this is the far end of the low-carb spectrum. It doesn't mean that this has to be everybody's destination, but as Professor Noakes pointed out in his presentation this morning, that the more insulin resistant a person is, the farther they have to go down the carbohydrate intake scale to drop down towards the improved metabolic condition and to get out of the damaging zone from as a result of carb intake. So this is not everyone's destination, but it is a destination that the more insulin resistant a person is, the more likely they need to target that to achieve the best result. So I'll show you this diagram that you saw this morning and just point out that, oops, wrong button. To point out that the goal here is to achieve ketone values above 0.5 millimolar, and most people don't have to worry about going above 3.0. If somebody does a period of a few days of fasting, they will go above 3, but if you're eating enough protein to maintain lean body mass, almost everybody stays under 3. So this is the target range that we define as nutritional ketosis. You don't have to be high in this range to get the benefits. And I've had a lot of questions from people today who measure their ketones and they say, well, you know, sometimes I'm even below 0.5 and sometimes I'm in this range, is that okay? We all differ one from another, and we still have a lot to learn about how high you need to get up to change not just the fuel flow, but the gene expression things that I mentioned. And if you get into that, our suspicion is if you get into that range for, say, 6 hours a day, you may trigger the benefits that then continue on even if you slide back down into a lower zone. So it's sort of sticking your head up and looking around to know where you are. You don't have to be looking for where you are all the time, and you still don't run into parked cars or parking meters and things like that. So again, the point here is that the island of safety that we're talking about for the most insulin resistant people is nutritional ketosis here. I'm not saying that paleo is not beneficial. Certainly, coming from the standard American diet, coming down to the paleo range will cause considerable benefit. But there's some people for whom the final destination needs to be lower and more moderate in protein in order to stay in this place where you will get those ketone values above 0.5 and hopefully above 1.0 millimolar. So I want to share with you not just the diet composition, but how that changes as a person who initiates a low-carb diet, how that changes as they move down the weight loss curve. So what we show here is a diagram in which you have 4 phases of weight loss, starting from the initial adaptation phase all the way down to maintenance. And so for just as the kind of a theoretical example, we start with, say, a woman who starts out weighing 200 pounds and over the course of many months loses down to 150 pounds. When an overweight person first goes on a well-formulated ketogenic diet, it's very common that they lose quite a bit of weight quickly. And that's because they have markedly enhanced satiety and loss of cravings, and they want to lose weight, so they consciously restrict calories and or unconsciously restrict them. And some people say it's just effortless, the weight came off. For other people, they have to pay attention to it. But that person weighing 200 pounds will initially probably have an energy expenditure of something like on the order of 2,800 calories per day. But if they're eating 1,400 calories a day, weight loss will average about 2.8 pounds a week. And then as the weight comes down, the energy expenditure comes down, associated to some degree with that reduction in weight. And people tend to eat more, and so what we see is that weight loss is steep initially, and then it tapers over time. But the important point is that at this point where they're eating 2,800, or burning 2,800 and eating 1,400, half of the body's fat oxidation comes from body fat. So the purple zone here is body fat contribution. That's why they're losing weight. As one tapers, the rate of weight loss increases the dietary fat. So if you go from 1,400 to 1,800 calories and very little of that is added carbs and you don't add much protein, then what you're doing is you're adding fat progressively. And as you add that fat progressively, there's a smaller and eventually a zero contribution from adipose tissue. And a lot of people get confused by this and they say, well, gee, if I'm in ketosis, why aren't I still losing weight? Because many people say, well, if you're in ketosis, you must be burning fat fast enough to gain weight or to lose weight. And that's because whether consciously or spontaneously, when someone gets to maintenance, they have to be eating roughly overall the same number of calories as they're burning. And so, people say, how is that? And I point out that, my weight's been stable. I've been on the ketogenic diet for 10 years. My weight's been stable for the last 9 years and 7 months. And yet I still have the level of ketosis. And the reason is that I'm in balance by eating over 70% of my calories is carbohydrate, and I eat about 5%, 70% is fat, and I eat about 5% is carbohydrate, which is what it takes for me to stay in a stable situation. And so here's one of the really practical issues that if someone's going to get to maintenance and still stay on the ketogenic diet, they have to eat a lot of fat. And as Professor Noakes said, people come to this with fat phobia, and we've got to cure them of that if we're going to be able to give them the opportunity to stay on a ketogenic diet and stay weight stable long term. So overcoming fat phobia is extremely important. The second point, and again, Dr. Fetke talked about this in his presentation and, in terms of inflammation, and that is we have a choice of fats and oils that we can eat. And for the last 40 years, we've been told that we need to avoid the saturated fats. So the red here is saturated fats, and you can see there's a list starting the one with the least saturate that's most commonly available is canola, going down to, and that's at about 6%, going down to coconut oil, which is up in the range of 90% of calories coming from saturated fat. And the reason it's red is that's why stop signs are red. They don't eat it because it's dangerous. When we now know that's not true. But the focus has been on saturated fat and the avoidance of saturated fat. And then the other point that many of the seed oil companies want to claim is that, well, the omega-6 linoleic acid is one of the 2 essential fatty acids, and so that's a, quote, good fat. It's also been shown in research in the past that when you feed somebody a high omega-6 oil content in their diet, their total cholesterol goes down. And the seed oil companies say, well, that's good, right? Except it goes down because HDL goes down. The good cholesterol goes down, and that's why eating a lot of the blue stuff here supposedly makes, is good for your cholesterol, when in fact it's not. It's driving down the beneficial, one of the beneficial fractions of total cholesterol. And then, of course, there is the fact that the omega-6s are the progenitors of arachidonic acid, which people like Barry Sears and others have vilified as being extremely dangerous and very inflammatory. But the truth is, arachidonic acid in tissue membranes is absolutely necessary for life, and it's only pro-inflammatory when it's released from the membranes to make into inflammatory compounds. So you have to be a little careful about making simplistic blanket comments about arachidonic acid per se. I don't want to get too deeply into that, but it turns out that when you do adipose biopsies on humans, what's really surprising, because basically whether we take a needle to anesthetize the skin and we take a little bit of fat, whether from here or here or wherever, and what we find consistently in people in a variety of locations, a variety of countries, and for me in a variety of states throughout the United States, that there's a very consistent pattern where something approaching half of the stored fat. Now, what's stored fat? That's what you save to burn tomorrow if there's no food available for you tomorrow. That half of that roughly is monounsaturated fat. And since olive oil is high in monounsaturates, I kind of say, under our skin we're all Italian. That this appears to be what the body stores, the composition of what it stores for what it's going to burn. If it has what it's going to burn is mostly fat. Well, what my body is burning in a keto-adapted state where I eat very little carbs and moderate protein is mostly fat. And so it appears that the best combination of fats and oils to consume when you're feeding yourself mostly fat should come from either monounsaturates and or saturated fats. So when you look at it from that perspective, if you look at lard here, it's about 41% saturates and 47% monounsaturates. And maybe something like lard is a reasonable composition of fat to eat. Now my wife is Asian and she says, of course, the best fat is lard, which was that and peanut oil were the traditional fats that they ate. And again, relatively high monounsaturated for peanut oil. Again, this is presumption. But the message here is avoid the high omega-6, I call them the big blues on this diagram here, and try to find something which gives a reasonable mixture of saturates and monounsaturates. The other one I tend to use, and over the course of many years seems quite acceptable, is to take olive oil and blend it 50-50 with butter. And that, you can actually blend those two together, put it in the fridge, and it's like a soft margarine, but it doesn't contain the trans fats that you get from margarine, and it doesn't have the high omega-6s. And it's a very nice fat because you can put it onto fish or meat or whatever and melt it in or on steamed vegetables, and it's got a very neutral flavor and a nice mouthfeel. And if you got to eat a lot of fat, that's a nice one to have. Well, people say that's way too expensive. Olive oil is really expensive. Except when I buy olive oil at my warehouse shopping center, I can buy 2 3-liter jugs of good quality olive oil for $23 in U.S. currency. And if you do the math on that, that's 50 cents for 1,000 calories. Now, where else when you go out to eat can you get 1,000 calories for 50 cents, I ask you? And so the idea that this is way too expensive a diet, a high-fat, moderate protein diet is way too expensive a diet, I don't buy it. If you're a clever shopper and you prepare things in bulk and then put them away, and you've heard that multiple times today, that's a practical solution to making this be a relatively inexpensive diet. So if you take 4 ounces of chicken breast and you grill it, and then you put 300 calories of a nicely flavored fat on the plate along with some steamed vegetables, makes a really, really nice entree and is very satisfying. And so attention to the composition of fat is very important for one's long-term success on this type of diet. And again, if you can't achieve maintenance, it's not going to do you, you're not going to benefit your health long-term. So again, now that I think all of our books have been sold, so I'm not plugging the book because it really plugs itself. But in the book Jeff Bullock and I share kind of a 7-day sample menus that guys our height and weight would eat. If you're a 55-kilogram woman, you would want to cut the proportions down. But this is just one day. I'm not going to give you all 7 days. But our point in doing this is this can be a pretty simple diet to prepare, and it can also be really luscious. So if you're rushed in the morning and you want to have something quick for breakfast, you just cook 4 sausages. Not hot dogs, but real sausages made with real meat, and a cup of coffee, and that can be a very satisfying breakfast and get you through till lunch. For lunch, you can have a salad that's simply made out of some water-packed tuna, a couple cups of greens, and people say, wait a minute, water-packed tuna? Why would I have water? Why want to have fat? Well, the problem is that most tuna is packed in soybean oil, and you don't want the soybean oil. So you get the water-packed tuna, and you put the oil in your dressing. And so I make a blue cheese dressing, which is I make with yogurt and olive oil. And why do I use yogurt rather than mayonnaise? Most mayonnaise is high in soybean oil. And the second is that yogurt is not an emulsion. So you can make a batch of this dressing, a large batch, and freeze it. And because it's not an emulsion, when you freeze it, it doesn't come apart. So when you thaw it out, you still have a consistent dressing. And the recipe for that is in the book. And so I make 10 or 20 servings of this at one time and put it in the freezer. So I take out a half a cup serving in a little Ziploc bag, put it in the bowl along with the lettuce when I'm rinsing the lettuce off, and it thaws out, and it takes me half a minute per serving to make the dressing. And so it's a really simple, quick meal can be made. Snacks would be a couple ounces of mixed nuts, maybe some soft cheese and some celery. We advocate having 2 cups of salty broth per day, whether it's homemade broth or the soup, the little bouillon cubes, not the ones that have lots of starch and stuff in them. And the reason for taking the salt is that when you're keto adapted, your kidneys excrete salt quickly. If you don't replace the salt, you're going to have lightheadedness, dizziness, fatigue, headache, and constipation. And in the States, that's what's casually called the Atkins flu, because most people who casually went on the Atkins diet would have these symptoms, and they say, well, I just feel bad all the time, I'm losing weight, so I'm going to put up with it. You don't have to put up with it. All it takes is 2 grams of sodium added to a lightly salted diet. So it's not a high salt diet, it's a moderate salt diet, and those symptoms all go away. And then dinner can be, I make homemade tomato bisque from the tomatoes I grow in my garden. It's our summer right now, so that's top of my menu. Moderate to size piece of steak, beans, mushrooms, and you can have homemade ice cream. We don't yet have commercial ice cream that's good, that's low carb, but it's possible to make homemade ice cream in batches, put it away. So I make it once a week or once every 2 weeks. And if I want to have a half cup or 3/4 cup serving of that, it's there in the refrigerator and ready to go. And that's how you can strategize over time to have the right kinds of fats available and simple to make for a satisfying meal. So again, I don't want to make this simple because there's actually a lot of sophistication to this. This is why Jeff and I wrote a book of how to do this, because there isn't a single soundbite that will tell you exactly how to do it. So the key steps is it's moderate protein, it's not high protein. More protein is not better, and it certainly is more expensive. And if you want to make it sustainable for the planet, we don't want to have large servings of animal protein. And this protein doesn't have to come from animals, it can include tofu. And some of the protein comes from nuts, it can come from eggs. The next is to have enough energy, because if you don't eat enough of the fat, you're going to, when you get to a lean weight, your body's going to say, go eat something, and it'll be non-specific. You'll eat anything if day after day you're trying to eat 500 calories less than you're taking in. As I just emphasized, the right kind of fat is critical. And then something that's often neglected and very important is mineral management, and one of those is just simple salt. By the way, if you're really, really anxious about salt being dangerous and you don't want to take it in, I suggest you read the New England Journal of Medicine from 2 weeks ago. There are a pair of papers from McMaster University in Ontario, Canada, and it's going to be the definitive study of over 100,000 people, and they showed that the optimum range for sodium intake for humans, not on a ketogenic diet, just on all diets, is between 4 and 6 grams a day. By the way, right now, the the American Heart Association wants us all to cut down to 2.3 grams per day. If you take the McMaster data and look at 2.3 grams per day, what happens is you have a 50% increase in cardiovascular disease and a 50% increase in all-cause mortality when you go from 4 grams a day down to 2.3. So this whole thing about demonizing sodium is about to be flipped upside down, just like the pyramid is now being flipped upside down. So if you're dizzy, I'm sorry, but get used to it, it's going to change. And then, again, not being too flippant. If things don't seem to be going quite right and you've got to figure out what should I do to clean things up, the first rule of thumb is eat less carbs. Don't eat more carbs. The next is, if in doubt, things don't seem to be going quite right, eat more fat. Don't eat less fat. This all sounds counterintuitive, but this actually works. And the final is, and we've heard this from other speakers, there has to be pleasure and satisfaction in your life. And one of the things that we do more often than anything else that gives us pleasure is not sex, but eating 3 times a day. It should taste good. It should be satisfying. You should walk away from your meal saying, I've had enough, and the confidence that you're not going to be plagued until the next time you come to your next meal. And with that, I'll end with my welcoming slide. Come visit me sometime. I'll put you up in my Inuit bed and breakfast. Thank you very much.